productivity lesson.
When I was done with the planning job in Brazil, I moved over to Aftersales. And I honestly, I didn't know anything about Aftersales. It wasn't, I didn't grow up in the aftermarket service world. It just wasn't something that I did.
Now, Aftersales, isn't that a European term for parts?
Parts and service, yes. Yeah, customer care, Mr. Goodwrench, pick a General Motors term, right? Aftersales was kind of a European thing, you're correct, in terms of what it was called. And Brazil, quite frankly, aligned itself more with the Europeans especially because of the Opel connection on the cars than we did necessarily aligning ourselves with North America. And plus, the head of overseas was the boss for both Europe and Brazil, right? So we used the language of international. So there were two guys that taught me a lot. One of them was Dick Baumgartner, who was an old warehousing guy. And he told me, he said, Warren, here's all you need to know about warehousing. This is probably after about 4 or 5 beers in Germany. He says, this is all you need to know about warehousing. If you have one guy on a job, you're going to get a certain level of productivity. If you add another guy to that job in the warehouse, your productivity is going to go down by 50% because they're going to end up talking to one another and they won't get their work done. He says, that's all you need to know. So when you walk through the warehouse, only thing you got to keep your eyes open for is how many people, 2 people, are standing around talking to one another rather than pulling parts and putting them into bins and getting them on trucks. If you keep your eyes open and do that, you're fine. So I said, Dick, I'll remember that forever. And he said, good. And the only other Dick Baumgartner story I have is we opened up a warehouse in Sorocaba, Brazil, brand new warehouse, parts warehouse. And I invited Dick down. And he was kind of like my functional boss, but not my boss because he was in charge of warehousing for International. And I said, come on down. I'm inviting you down. And he walks in the warehouse. Opening day of the warehouse, the ribbon cutting opening. And there's a full orchestra there. And he says, what are they? I says, this is Brazil. We're going to have, he says, you're kidding me. I says, no, this is what we're going to do. And he says, I've never been to a warehouse opening ever where there's been an orchestra. I said, well, welcome to Brazil. And we got, and he lives in Jacksonville, Florida, and he's still a good friend of mine. But the other person was Bob Arndt. And I learned a lot from Bob Arndt. And here is a productivity lesson that was never, to my knowledge, implemented in General Motors, but it was the most sophisticated approach to picking parts in a warehouse that I ever ran into in all the time before I left. And I'm going to do my best to explain it. Typically in a warehouse, a person gets sent out to pick parts. And if they're good, they'll go and actually do the job that they're supposed to do. And now I'm being a little sarcastic. If they don't, they'll go way into the back of the warehouse and go to sleep. Okay. And so Bob Arndt, who came from Toyota, devised a system that was computerized. And it worked as follows. You remember being in a car rental place where you had all the rental reservations in the back, and it looked like they had like 50 reservations, right? They probably still have that today in car rentals. I haven't rented a car in a while. Anyways, imagine that board at the front of a warehouse, and each of those tickets, like you have on a car rental, represents a certain level of work for a day or for an hour or for a half hour. Okay? And then across the top were the individual's names that shift that were going to work in the warehouse. And what this thing did was it computerized all of the work so that the hour task had to be performed in 55 minutes, right? Meaning you had to work. You had to do it. No different than a car rolling down the assembly line and the workers got to put the part into the car or screw the part down in a car. This was taking that kind of tack time equivalent into a warehouse. And I sat there and I watched. This was in Jacksonville, the Jacksonville warehouse in Florida. which was a trial run that the UAW wanted a trial before it was implemented fully across General Motors. And I sat there for the whole day and watched those folks work. And at the end of the day, every one of the tickets, at the end of the shift, because I watched 2 shifts, at the end of the shift, every one of the tickets was taken. All of the stuff was loaded into bins. All the bins were loaded on the truck on time. I said, Bob, this is amazing. He said, where did you learn this? And he said, well, we were doing some of this stuff at Toyota. And when I came to GM, I thought about it a little more, and I want to get this done. It's the most efficient way to pick parts, because the supervisor who's sitting on the floor knows exactly whether the workload is half done, a quarter done, or 2/3 done, so he knows he's going to meet that truck schedule. And 2, it shows the people that they have a full task to do, and they're going to get they got to pull each one of those tickets to get done. And he said, and we program it so they can't lollygag around. They got to do what they got to do. And the computer knows. I mean, they had the times measured from the start of the job to the part, and the distance and the time it was required to walk that distance. Very, very sophisticated system. Unfortunately, and I thought it was the equivalent to any type of lean production system that I'd ever seen at Toyota in terms of warehouse picking parts. It's a great productivity story. I don't think that system was ever implemented in General Motors, ever. And I think, and I'm speculating here, I think because it wasn't, I sensed that the UAW didn't like it. And because it was never really implemented, Bob went to, I think he's like, some senior executive at Ryder now. I haven't talked to him in a long, long time. But the lesson here is you don't have to do automation like they do in an Amazon warehouse in order to get the productivity to meet the schedule. This was a no automation solution to getting the parts, which is what you want. If the truck's going to leave at 6, you got to have the parts on the dock at 5. They got to load on the truck, and the truck goes. This was a non-high investment way to get the productivity out of the warehouse to be effective, and I thought it was phenomenal. And I don't talk to anybody at GM anymore, but I'd really like to know what happened to that system, because it was effective. So I'm giving your.
Why do you think you said the UAW didn't like it, or you thought that maybe it was because the UAW didn't like it?
Okay, this is Deep Secrets Revealed.
Deeper.
Yeah, because Bob felt that even though there was 8 hours of work on the cards, he could get that down to, if you organize the parts more effectively in the warehouse, meaning the travel times were less, right? That he could get 8 hours worth of work down to 6 hours. And the UAW was smart enough to figure that out in terms of what it meant for labor. Look, it's, he said, Warren, what you're seeing today is only the prototype of the system. There is stuff that we can do to get the work out of this place. And if we implemented it in every General Motors warehouse across the globe, we would be the leaders in efficiency, guaranteed. But I don't think it was ever implemented for the reasons that I've described.
This has been Jeff Stearns, Connected Through Cars.